So we have C.S. Lewis today, but before we get to that, there's a lot of Reddit stuff going on.
Yeah.
And there's like a backlog because our last podcast with Ted Brown, we didn't talk about any of the Reddit stuff from Schopenhauer.
We should have asked Ted Brown about Reddit.
Yeah, yeah, we should have. But there was this one thing that was like sticking in my craw. This one back and forth I had about Schopenhauer, and it's just one of these. It's just this way that some people on Reddit interact, where it's like you say something, and they act like you just like made up the most insane thing out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, it's hilarious.
It's like.
It's ridiculous.
Like, I think sushi is Japanese, and they're like, "Are you an idiot?"
Yeah.
Where did you get that idea?
Yeah,
something like that. So it was like that. So I made a post about Schopenhauer talking about nihilism and comparing or using Schopenhauer's sympathies towards Buddhism as a way of sort of likening him to nihilism, because I see Buddhism as a nihilistic philosophy. And these are just my thoughts. So that's like the preface of it is, I think, what do you think? And so this person was like, I don't know where you got this idea that Schopenhauer is nihilistic. Like, do you just call things you don't like nihilistic?
Oh, it's that exchange. Yeah, I remember.
And then it was really silly because it got into this really dumb minutia about nihilism. And I didn't end up posting all this stuff, but there are several books written about Schopenhauer and nihilistic philosophy. So whether this person agrees, it's not like crazy.
No, you sent me this and yeah, I mean, because you asked me, like, don't you think Schopenhauer's like associated with nihilism? I was like, yeah. I mean, I do. It's. I think where you get in trouble with people is because he hasn't explicitly said nihilism. I don't think he ever explicitly talked about nihilism. That was Nietzsche's thing,
Right.
Weariness for man or whatever, however he defined it.
But like, there's a book called The History of Nihilism in the 19th Century, and the third chapter is all on Schopenhauer.
Right.
There's also a Wikipedia entry on this thing called existential nihilism.
Yes.
And it lists Schopenhauer as a main theoretician on this topic. And so this is the thing, is like whether or not that conforms to this particular person's definition of nihilism, whatever, there's a perfectly interesting conversation to have there. But it just never happens because... This is where, like, this is like what I found this week too, is nobody is willing to state what they think. They just like quote Wikipedia at me all day, and that's boring. I don't care. I want to. So if you say I don't think he's nihilistic because, that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's funny. Yeah, I agree with you. Get revved up. We gotta. I mean, It is a bit of a how do you say losing battle to think you're ever going to change the mentality of a Redditor, but
it's not about the Redditor. It's like so you have your consciousness bent.
No. Sorry.
My bent
Go ahead.
Is I want people to speak up for themselves and tell me what they think. And like there's both a humility to that and like a respect for yourself in that. It's both.
But people love plausible deniability.
Yeah, right. Like some other person said this. Like, cool. What do you think about that? Do you think they're right? Are you telling me that you agree with that statement? No, you seem to be telling me that I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Based on
that's
this.
much more fun, don't you think?
Yeah, right.
What's more fun as a troll on the internet? Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. And then, of course, like a lot of Redditors are like teenagers, I mean, honestly, not a lot. Obviously, there's, as we who sort of grew up on Reddit have grown older and stayed on there. There's a lot of older people on it now.
Right.
But there's still a lot of like new young people finding Reddit and just posting. I mean, just like teenagers.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, this person didn't come off as a teenager, and it's true that you get that in the Reddit phenotype of the just shut down the position entirely right away and say that they're an idiot. It's good.
It's usually not even the broader point of what I'm saying. I've usually made a point, and they pick one like phrase that I've used, and they're like, "Are you an idiot because you think this phrase means this thing?" I actually wanted to quote. There's a Marcus Aurelius quote that I was trying to find, because he talks about bronze level thinking, and he says correcting people's usage and meaning is like third tier thinking. It's a way of making yourself feel smarter than you actually are.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, because like often, unless you really are having a hard time understanding the person, but if it's not, your position to be their teacher, then it's, it just comes off as...
Right. Because he says that the more intellectual thing to do would be to try and understand what they're saying.
Well, and yeah, yes, of course.
Like, in a sense, it doesn't matter if they've used a word wrong. What do they mean? What's the idea? Is it a good idea or not?
Yeah, no, and that's certainly a refrain that we have on our podcast. Much to everybody's chagrin on Reddit, I'm sure.
That inflation one I got into. Like yesterday.
So
before.
You posted
that one drove me crazy too. I wanted to like keep going and just like I had all these like mean retorts that I got to, and like I had them typed, like like get the government's dick out of your mouth kind of a thing. But like,
yeah,
but I did.
But you withheld.
I did.
Wow. How come? Michelle Obama.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I just thought about Michelle, and
when they go low, you go high.
Yeah. It felt like it wasn't going to do me any favors, because probably he'd then come back with something else mean, and it's just like it would never end in a way that felt fulfilling.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think it's always better to ignore them. Although I did see you getting more fiery than I'd seen you before talking. Like you're telling somebody they were boring. It was that one person.
Just that one, though. I don't think I insulted anybody else.
What was that? Did they respond to you?
Yeah.
What did they say?
They said something like, "Oh, because that was the one where I conceded that they were." Yeah, I mean, if you want to find it, you can read it. It's pretty funny.
It is funny.
So the background on this one was I was talking about inflation with the Ted Brown episode from Monday, and I used the term in my post "rising inflation," and they were catching me on a technicality that inflation isn't rising.
Should we shout them out? I don't even know.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
But inflation isn't rising. And so my basic question to them, because this was the kind of argument I kept getting into, was like, are you claiming that inflation isn't a problem, or that the dollar isn't losing value? And then it gets all the way to the bottom, and then it displays that kind of what they're saying is that, because their final point was actually wages have surpassed inflation, which is one of these things where, like, whatever metric they're using to come up with that number, that's nonsense. That is not the world we're living in.
Yeah, I think you basically summed it up. Yeah. I mean, just like you were like, your choice to waste time in pedantry rather than substantive arguments is obnoxious and boring. I like that. That's good. It's good.
Yeah.
I've asked you your opinion several times, and you have failed to provide it.
Didn't give me an opinion.
But yes. Yeah, I mean, this is why it's like I.
The funny thing is, I said where he's technically right about that correction. Mm-hmm. And then his next post was like even snarkier.
Yes.
Where he's just like, and I guess you also don't understand real wages and blah, 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 like some nonsense.
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I've been spending a bunch of my time in the crypto subreddits, which are also like equally, like hilarious and toxic and stuff, because it's like 90% of them people just shilling, coins that, and then the 5% is like somebody asking like just a genuine question, and then people telling them that they're idiots,
Where do people get this confidence? I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's two things. It's maybe it's the fact that I've been teaching for so long, but
maybe
there's no level of, say, music question somebody could ask if they were asking it earnestly that would bother me.
So this is interesting. I actually think it is a symptom of the people who created the internet, or I should say the types of people that created the internet.
Right.
Which are people mostly autistic, I would say, who are the type of people who figure stuff out for themselves. Mm-hmm. Like they don't ask other people.
Right.
And I'm saying this because like as I've been programming more and getting I've always known people like this, but now having bosses who are like this and colleagues who are like this, and just meeting the 60 and 70-year-olds who made the internet and started the culture that we are all picking up, right?
Right.
It is this culture of, just figure it out yourself. And that's the whole thing, is nobody... And so, like, I work on an Arch Linux system. Arch Linux is like one of the most bare bones sort of operating systems in the Linux family that you can use. You have to basically do everything by the terminal and stuff like that. Right. And getting started on it was a nightmare, because it's like I would Google a question.
You don't even know what question to ask.
Yeah, and then I would go to the AUR forum, and it would be like people would just link the wiki of Arch, but then it's like I can't understand the wiki though. It's like the wiki is too much for me. Yep. I need it broken down, but it's like they're not going to do that because you should be smarter and you should be able to figure this out. And if you can't figure it out yourself, then you shouldn't be even working in Linux. And I think that's how a lot of people feel on Reddit, because you have all these small communities. They're like, you shouldn't even be speaking on this. You shouldn't be, it's just the guild system on crack, basically.
Right. I don't know. To me, it's cowardly.
Well, you're a communist at heart. You believe in sort of like,
I believe in the free spread of information.
Source.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, very into that. Yeah.
I know. It's just funny because it is a more communistic thing about you. But this is the amazing thing about Linux, right? Is that you have all of these anonymous people who don't want to necessarily tell you anything, but they're doing all this stuff for free. Yeah. It's amazing. At the same time,
part of it is a little bit Reddit, because I've also worked with very nice Linux communities in the past, who have been like people who have been very helpful within the open source and Linux community to me.
Yeah,
and like there's some cool GitHub repositories out there where people have put a lot of really helpful stuff. Yeah,
for sure. I guess what I'm saying is I feel like Reddit still has some of that old mentality of the internet, which was very much a don't speak unless you know what you're talking about, basically. Which I get,
Right, but nobody knows what they're talking about. Well, this is the thing. Like, people are speaking really authoritatively on things that they know something about, like most people, but they don't know everything about. And then you see it in these battles where people are like arguing super authoritatively on things, and they're all kind of right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, this is the difference, of course, is that the people on the Arch forums know a lot about Arch. They just don't want to help you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but I will say it's interesting. The Schopenhauer episode did very well. The Ted Brown episode did well too, although that was just 2 days ago, so it's still coming in. But Schopenhauer, people seem to have liked, surprisingly, actually.
Well, I think actually it's interesting, because my wife was saying that from my description of his philosophy, and it seems like I still don't understand everything about it. It seems like I'm missing something, but it seems like something that basically coincides with sort of like modern millennial philosophy.
Yes. Yes. I mean, actually, I think my brother said that when we were reading or, discussing him.
Right.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly with what point.
I think that it's like you can see where, say, like antinatalism could come into it pretty
That was
easily.
it. I think that was the point, actually.
Yeah.
I think it was the antinatal. Yeah, because it was about the idea of like bringing somebody into a world where there's so much suffering is kind of like
right.
an ethically questionable thing to do.
And then focusing on suffering as the sort of the center point of everything.
Mm-hmm. All you had to do was use pessimism instead of nihilism. You would have been fine.
No, but I'm sticking by nihilism.
Yeah.
I think it's both, but I think there's a reason I use nihilism. Because of nothingness. Because oblivion. And I know that the argument is not in the whole will thing, and I need to read more about it, but I don't think there's nothing to what I'm saying.
Well, but is nothingness nihilism? It's weariness of man, I suppose. Maybe it is, because it's almost. I think it's kind of a weariness of consciousness.
like the null hypothesis. I think it's the same root. Null. Yeah.
Right, but you see why you're going to get yourself into trouble if you're using a definition of nihilism people aren't necessarily used to.
So this person thought I meant bad.
Yeah,
that's
true.
not what I meant at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyway, I can get into it, but this is where I'm happy to define what I mean by it, and if somebody else means something else, I'm also happy to explore a different understanding of it.
Yeah,
meaning doesn't matter. Just
yeah.
Anyway,
well,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
C.S. Lewis.
He talks about this a little bit, actually. Interestingly, he does have a little bit that we can talk about on this same idea.
Okay, yes, C.S. Lewis. This was interesting. Very interesting.
Very different from pretty much anything we've talked about. You don't think so? Okay, cool.
Well, I mean, I guess in the sense
what do you
that
relate it to?
Well, consciousness.
No. I mean, like, what? Who else have we talked about who you would relate this writing to?
Well, he's talking about an objective morality and an objective truth.
Sure.
Hoppe.
Yes, I did get that too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or really any of the people that we've read that have talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe like Rose Wilder Lane in a sense.
Yeah.
But no, you're right in the sense that it is completely pro-Christian and stuff like that and whatnot, and it's talking about Christianity and morality, I suppose. Yeah, we haven't discussed too much of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So we're reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which, as my understanding, was originally talks he gave on BBC Radio during World War II.
Yes.
Which he then later published in written form. And he's got some cool stuff in the preface about that and the whole process. Did you read the preface too?
I read a little bit of it, enough to, figure out exactly what you said about, it was a series of talks and stuff. But no, I mean, the preface was pretty long, if I recall.
Yeah. There was also a foreword in my version too, written by somebody else, but they were giving the context of it, and I think it's an important sort of piece of context. And we've talked about stuff like this with Nietzsche too, and Schopenhauer. But sort of where this writing is coming from, because it's coming sort of in the midst of, we've talked about this before, like the worst thing that has ever happened, at least in Europe. Mm-hmm. Like hell has broken loose. Mm-hmm. London is being bombed. The UK is at full-out war with Germany, and death toll is out of control. There's rationing, there's starvation. They're sending children out into the countryside to hide. It's a rough time in the UK. And so this is where he's writing about sort of good and evil and moral philosophy, and then Christianity from his point, because C.S. Lewis is, I don't know if he's considered an early, but he's considered a seminal Christian apologist. Which is it's a fun term, but there's a whole movement in Christianity called apologetics. And it's this movement of people who try and create sort of rational constructions for Christianity and sort of logical rationalizations for why Christianity makes sense. And you can see him doing that in this first book that we read this week. He's laying out a sort of rational principles to where you begin to believe, where the belief comes from. Not saying it's compelling, but that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly it. He's trying to build up an argument for why Christianity makes sense. And he's doing it during World War II.
It's interesting. There's a point he makes in the preface that there's a couple points that I wanted to talk about. But one is he says that he is not interested in discussing theological disputes with non-Christians. And so, like if the Methodists have a dispute with the Presbyterians about some doctrinal thing, he said, this is not a conversation to have with a non-believer. These conversations only make sense sort of like intra-faith. And then outside of the faith, the conversations that make sense are rational constructions for belief.
Yeah. I mean, this was in the preface?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting because there's this presuppositionalist who is pretty annoying, who I used to listen to sometimes, who presuppositionalism is this weird type of thought, and I think we've talked about it with respect to Foucault and that circle a little bit, but the presuppositionalist Christians say that God is presupposed to be true and is the basis of truth. So any claim that you make as a Christian or an atheist or in anything is a claim displaying a belief in God. So a claim saying that, 1 + 1 = 2 is true, that is tantamount to saying, I believe in God. Because by saying anything is true, you are displaying belief in God, because it's presupposed that God's existence is true.
How convenient.
Exactly. But, yeah, exactly. This is why this guy's annoying. Because, you can say anything to him, and he'll be like, yeah, see, you believe in God.
Yeah, see, you think about consciousness. How annoying. God.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're a consciousness presupposition.
I certainly am.
Anyway, he has the same thing. He will not engage in any doctrinal dialogue with somebody who is not already within the faith. So if somebody says, what about this contradiction in this scripture versus this scripture? He'll say, let's take it back. You believe in contradiction, it seems like. That means you already believe in God.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're saying that's about the presuppositionist? Or
That's what he
Lewis?
says.
Yeah. And I can certainly see that in C.S. Lewis, in what you're saying. Because, at least, so we read the first book, like you said, as you also already said, he's building up a case, and so where does he choose to start this case? But he starts by saying, look, let me just think about what I know, and I know that there feels like there's this force.
Yes.
And he's calling it the universal sort of the law of human nature.
The natural law, yeah.
The natural law, yeah, and then he calls it a lot of different things, but yeah, the law of human nature. It's the only law we can disobey, and it's this idea roughly of be unselfish, be fair, treat others the way you want to be treated kind of thing. That feeling that you're doing something wrong.
Yes.
He is basically, his whole point in this first book is that is a universal feeling that everybody has, and it's basically the opposite of postmodernism. It's not culturally determined or anything. Right. It is ingrained in people, and you either listen to it or you don't. Yep. But everybody has it.
Yeah.
So I thought that's obviously very, he stated his opinion very defiantly. Yeah. You must like that.
I do like that. I paraphrased it in my notes as the moral impulse. Mm-hmm. So your sense of what is right and wrong, I think, is what he's getting at.
Yeah, and he had an interesting thing at the end of the chapter talking about how basically Christianity has nothing to say to people who do not realize they've done anything wrong or need to repent. Mm-hmm. It's like it only works. Christianity only says something to you if you first understand that there's a moral law. Mm-hmm. And then I have here, which requires consciousness, in little parentheses and whisper, which requires consciousness.
Well, what's funny is I actually feel like he's building to an argument like that, because there's this next thing, and I know it just from listening to other Christian apologists, because he gets to the end of this book where he's talking about, this moral impulse actually is implying some kind of mind or structure outside of existence as we know it, that is the basis for this moral impulse. And the next step is that, he says it's something like a mind. It might not be something. It might not be a mind. It might not be a person, because we're still at this kind of like primordial rational construction. But I'm sure where he's going with it is that actually it has to be a person, and it has to be a conscious person. And so it gets back to the idea of the source of consciousness. I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying I'm pretty sure that's where the argument's going.
Yeah, it might be. Because certainly he's talking about how, he makes a bunch of analogies about like how, well, like you can only know yourself, basically. That's the only thing you can really know. And that you observe everything else, mm-hmm. but yourself is the only thing you can know. And the fact that you have this feeling of a moral law tells you something very deep about the construction of reality. Mm-hmm. And so, if then it's sort of made to be, although I don't know, in that sense, it feels like it's not going to be sort of anthropomorphized. So I guess we'll just see. But
I would bet money.
Yeah,
just because I know I've heard this argument before.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
God has to be personal. Okay. It's like it's a whole part of it.
Wait, it has to be personal or a person?
A person.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Like a personal God, a God mm-hmm. who is a subjective person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. Anyway, I think that I think there's flaws already that I've found, but I think that mm-hmm. It's similar to Hoppe actually, where he sets out a basic premise. He was talking about time preference, and then everything unfolds from there, which is nice. I like the way of doing it because it's kind of easy to follow it out. I appreciate mm-hmm. it, and I think that the basis makes a lot of sense, and I think it's correct. And I think it's like this. There's something sort of mysterious or spooky about it, where he says that the moral instinct is what I'm calling it, but the law of human nature. I think it's tricky. Law is a tricky word because when you're talking about a law of physics, it's like not breakable.
Well, and he makes that point. It's
exactly.
the only law that you can
that
break.
Is breakable, which makes law kind of a funny word to use. But anyway. The sense of what is right and wrong.
Well, it's a law because you have it. That's his point.
Well, but you have instincts too. He says that too.
Yeah. Yes. But this is an instinct that you don't have to listen to.
Right. Yeah. I guess he's saying it isn't an instinct. I guess, although mm-hmm. saying that it's built into all of us makes it seem like an instinct. Right. I don't know. The sense. I guess another way of putting it is your sense of right and wrong. Your conscience on your shoulder. Jiminy Cricket.
Well, it's the same. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing. It's Socrates' demon in a sense, right?
And so what he said, he lays out the situation that your instincts are gonna draw you in certain directions, and you hear somebody who's hurt in the distance calling for help. Mm-hmm. You're gonna have a few different instincts. You're gonna have an instinct to ignore it and keep going because probably someone else has heard it, probably someone else helped them. You don't want to get yourself involved in whatever the hell's going on over there. And that you might also have another instinct to help them, but the one to keep going is going to be stronger. And so your moral, this law of human nature, your moral law is going to be the thing if there is a thing that'll do this, that'll grab you and go, no, you need to go help them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And so when he's rationalizing why it is universal, he's using an interesting point, which I think isn't foolproof, but it certainly was, an interesting logical sort of maneuver where he's talking about, that he's saying, he ends, I think section 1 or maybe 2 with saying that there is a moral standard and any perceived moral differences are, may be due to differences of facts. Mm-hmm. And this is he uses the example of burning witches in England.
Oh, yes.
And he's basically saying, like, if witches exist, it's actually morally good to burn them.
Yeah, I know. It's a little, like, rough.
So, yeah, he's saying, but the fact is they don't exist. So they were wrong in the facts, but their morality was actually correct.
Right.
I thought that was a very interesting point.
It is an interesting point, yes.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, it sounds actually right to me, but it also sounds kind of silly. But
yes.
I think I get what he's saying. But it's also like, this is where it's like teasing out where your morality begins and the facts end is difficult because he's basically saying on, I think, an assumption, our morality has nothing to do with facts. And I taking the neuro sort of materialist approach, I'm like, all of the facts that you aggregate over time is what creates your morality.
Right.
And I mean, he addresses this to an extent by, giving credence to the fact that we learn things from teachers and society and everything, but he still is maintaining that there's a fundamental sort of
So I guess
instinct,
what
thing
from the materialist perspective, what is the fact or set of facts that leads you to believe that stealing is wrong?
Well, what is a fact, I guess?
Well, but you just said that we derive our morality from like a collection of, or I guess, information, right?
Yeah, well, it's the memory that you got hit when you stole by your parents or something like that, or what? Or not hit. This is the 21st century Count Sarnet, but you know what I mean is like you
So do you think the basis of it was? So how did we start doing it then? Because getting hit by your parents isn't like for stealing. If that's the case, if it really is just it's that cultural. It's just like if you get in trouble, then you start to internalize it's wrong. If you don't get in trouble, you never think it's wrong. I'm sure he would say that's nonsense.
He would, but I would say that he doesn't understand childhood psychology very well and is kind of taking a naive approach.
I think childhood psychology is naive. In this case, I'm on his side, not specifically with any particular thing, but that your moral code is not just your moral code doesn't come directly from what you got in trouble. It's not that hedonistic.
No, but it is very behavioral. And that's my point. I'm much more of a behavioralist than I think both of you. So that would make sense if you don't.
Yeah, I don't think that your actions as an adult are directly controlled by your treatment as a child.
Yeah, I mean, well, what is direct, I guess, because it's a long...
There's things I was hit for as a child that I don't think are wrong. And there's things that I wasn't hit for as a child that I do think are wrong.
Right. But there's also countless examples of sort of people saying, like, I didn't even think it was wrong to, like, steal this thing, right? I had no even conception of it. Or even now, you have examples of different cultures, like being integrated in Europe and different sort of basically mores of how you're supposed to court people, right? And
Wait,
so I'm trying to be aseptic here, but basically
I'm
like
not really
sexual
following
assault.
you.
Sexual
Okay,
assault
okay.
from immigrants, essentially, in
so,
Europe. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry. I was like, what?
I just said it for you. There you go, Antushka. Okay. But in any new culture, right, there's going to be differences in how you're supposed to interact with the,
Yes.
other sex. And so that's the idea, right? Is that it's like you can be touching somebody, or you can yell at somebody and not even realize it's wrong because based off of the fact that you weren't ever chastised for that or something, or it wasn't something that your culture chastised people for. It was more accepted, or whatever it is. Like that's.
I think
an easy
usually.
example.
So where I think it's difficult because it's difficult to argue actually rationally about this. I think that it's something like cruelty, like torture, is something that I would say is pretty universally. I'm not saying totally universally, but pretty universally at this point in the world considered a bad thing to do. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't go around torturing people. Mm-mm. And then something he does address, which I think is kind of the other side of it, and it's related to the facts thing about, you might say that a certain ethnicity, they're not really people. They don't have as much consciousness. Women aren't people. Or there's some extenuating circumstance that he's talking about. Yeah, right, exactly. There's some extenuating circumstance that it actually does make sense to act in this way in this situation. So we're good at rationalizing reasons why it might make sense to act this way. And so then we can say, I didn't know it was wrong because I didn't think they were people, or I didn't think they felt pain, or I don't think it's wrong in this case because they've been oppressing me for decades or something like that. But all of those arguments display that you do think that the principle is wrong.
Yes, that there is a wrong, and that was his point, is that there's still a standard.
Right. So in this case, you
is it a
do
universal
believe
standard?
Right.
Yeah.
And he's saying that there are, and
yes.
I am inclined to believe that there probably are at least almost universal standards.
Yeah, and this is where it's like I just equivocate, because like in some cases I do see that, but then it's just, and this is the other point is, I mean he was very well educated. I'm talking about C.S. Lewis now. Right. So, and England, because of their colonial past, knew a lot about they were one of the places that knew the most about other cultures at the time, right? Right. Because, I mean, they were studying everybody, right, including themselves. So I'm not saying he's completely ignorant about other civilizations and stuff like that, but I do wonder how much he himself knows about how sort of different other civilizations are and societies, and with what their mores are and everything like that. Because why do I keep saying moray?
I don't know. But now I know what you're talking about. So
pretentious. But it's just like you can. There are examples of just. I'm trying to think of good examples now of just.
Well, I mean, he brings up.
Even just sacrifice. I mean,
he brings that one up, right? With like Aztecs or something like that.
Yeah. And I understand what he's saying, where it's like,
you can come up with a reason why it makes sense right now to do that.
Well, exactly, and that's his point: is the facts are wrong, right?
Or you just have an excuse.
Well, in that sense, I definitely agree that there is a universal. Everybody has a moral sense.
Sure.
And it seems to be binary. Of good, like you have a sense if something's good or bad. I do agree with him if you're sufficiently conscious. That's where I bring consciousness in. Right. I don't think you do I don't think morality exists without consciousness.
Well, he even says that too.
Oh, he does. Well, that's good.
Well, because he's talking about instincts, and like an animal is operating just on instincts, but this is this kind of ghost in the machine that us humans have.
This is why I don't know if it could ever be universal, because I'm not sure that there is a universal, like, perspective, if that makes sense.
What if we don't say universal perspective? What if the ghost in the machine is just good and bad?
Yeah, and then you just tune that to whatever it is.
Yeah.
But do you see what I'm saying? It's like
I see what you're saying. I just don't. I know why you're saying it, and I think it's a reasonable thing to say. I suspect it's not true.
I want to suspect it's not true, but this is where the postmodernist in me, I suppose, comes in and tells me,
they're dummies. Come on.
Well, I don't think they are. I think they're just radical skeptics.
No, they're dumb. Come on.
Yeah. No. Again, from a scientific perspective, radical skepticism is good.
I agree with this, by the way.
And it's the idea of just understanding that, yeah, at the very least, it's impossible to tease out your cultural, understanding from. And this is Judith Butler's whole point, right?
But the reason I'm saying they're dummies, I'm actually doing it for a rhetorical reason.
Yeah,
I don't actually believe these people are stupid.
You're being a Redditor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probing the point because without even being specific, I will say that we as a culture are being dragged around through nonsense all the time.
Yes.
And that nonsense has piles of rationalistic garbage on top of it.
Well, as you say,
and what I'm saying is, like, it can be dismissed outright. Like, you can look at like, for instance, real wages have surpassed. Real wages have surpassed inflation and some nonsense. I mean, talk about a cruel statement. I mean, that is an insanely callous perspective to have, given the economic situation of people living in the United States today.
Actually, so what does that for me?
Yeah.
So I'm understanding what that even means. That means basically that the wages are able to keep up with inflation. People
are surpassing inflation. People are making more
enough to deal
than
with.
Prices have gone up.
Yes. Well, that is the ultimate point that anybody has for this. I mean, it always comes down to that.
Right. Like, the economy is awesome. It's essentially like Joe Biden did it. We're rocking. The economy's never been so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's absurd.
Anyway,
it's absurd.
Sorry,
I mean, like, you can start breaking down markets. You can look at the housing market. You can look at the car market. You can look at wages and, like, real wages. It's not even close. It's because it's a trick. It's a numbers trick, because they do things like yachts have not gone up that much, and yachts are extremely expensive. So you add them into the mix, and now they have a huge effect. And so eggs went from $1 to $4. But yachts are like, $250,000. And so if they're static, the $1 to $4 doesn't do anything. But people at the bottom aren't buying yachts anyway.
Yeah. Or Shure SM7 microphones are still $400. They've been $400 for like,
I mean, that's great.
10 years.
And the Costco hot dogs. Yeah. There's like funny stuff, but
yeah.
I don't know. It's just. It's obnoxious to me, and it's this thing where it's coming out of. This is where I was saying, like, I wanted him to take the government's cock out of his mouth, because it's like that. It is such nonsense that it can be dismissed, and so that's an example, and that's not even getting into like social arguments that are going on that are actually affecting people's lives in very negative ways. But this is where. That's why I'm saying people like Foucault and Judith Butler are idiots. They're not actually idiots. They're very smart people. They're able to craft like complex arguments that takes a smart person to do.
But it's interesting you used the word rationalistic arguments, because it's like that can be dismissed, because that's how you described it. Because that's kind of exactly how I viewed this in some sense.
Yeah,
because I was like, this is World War II. This is the height of, this is like height of radio propaganda. I mean, they were really just hitting their stride in propaganda. Yeah. And you can see all of this sort of underlying propaganda in it, talking about, right versus wrong, and how we're right and the Nazis are wrong.
Yes,
we're Christian and the Nazis are Satan.
Yes.
It's like, so I was also having a hard time buying everything he was saying because I kept reading those little like propagandistic elements in it of like, I was like, okay, well, this is very, I mean, it was interesting, don't get me wrong, but it was very of the time.
I mean, I think he's wrong. I just think I suspect that his basic premise about the moral, right, good and bad thing is more or less correct.
Yeah. Well, because this is also essentially what Sam Harris thinks, and you've been listening to Sam Harris for a while too, right?
Yeah, I haven't listened to him in a long time, but yes.
But I used to listen to him
a lot. Yeah.
He makes the point of I mean, this is in his moral landscape.
Well,
book.
that's not universal. It's that
there are peaks and troughs.
There are multiple ways there are multiple methods to better societies.
Right.
That's the way it's a landscape, because you could do it this way, you could do it this way, or you could do it this way. Yeah.
Right.
And some societies do it better than others.
Right. But there is he argues there is a universal.
Right. It's anything that gets away from ultimate suffering. Like anything, the further away from pure ultimate suffering of everything you get, the better.
Well, then at the end, I mean, I like this quote that C.S. Lewis had. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth, only soft soap. Is that what it says? Yeah. And wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair.
Yeah.
So you go tell your friend Mr. Harris that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a little bit of it's kind of like the what is it, the Ben Franklin one that goes around a lot?
The blood of the Tree of Liberty.
No, the security,
Benjamin Franklin. Sorry,
security,
that's
freedom.
Oh yeah.
Those who would trade security for freedom deserve neither, kind of a thing.
It
kind of rings similar. What's funny is I have a note by that where it's like the more I have been looking for truth, the more despair I'm finding. Like the more of these we read, the more depressed I am. So.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, maybe I'm not looking for truth. Maybe I'm just reading people's nonsense.
No, I mean, I think this is a function of the more you read and think about these things, the more you're leaning into consciousness, and that's the thing to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is why, you've talked about not leaning into consciousness, and I think there are times not to lean into consciousness.
Yeah. But so I mean, we can get into some of the areas where I think he starts to go off the rails a little bit.
The architect analogy, maybe.
I mean, yeah. What's that? What do you got
that,
there? I don't remember.
He was saying it's on like page 24. He's saying like an architect. He's basically trying to make the point that you're not going to find any necessarily examples of God in reality of like of their form.
Yes, because
right. It's like you're not going to see the form of an architect in the wall.
The architect isn't going to be a wall.
Yeah, but I thought it was kind of not a great analogy because it's like, I agree. You can get the sense of an art, like a Frank Lloyd Wright house looks a lot different than a Mies van der Rohe building,
and if we're really being like technical, he could like put himself in the wall.
Well, Frank Lloyd Wright had trees in his house, I mean, it's like there, and then you see all these quotes about people saying like, I see God in their creation and stuff like that. Yeah. So I mean, I thought that was kind of a weak analogy. I
agree. I also thought that one was weak. The biggest issue, or the first major issue I had, was in the second section. So he lays out we have instincts, and then we have this moral code, which is what pulls us to do the harder instinct because we think it's the right thing to do. And then he said that two people arguing about morals, you shouldn't steal, you should steal because it is retributive for all the sins of the past, whatever. Like any dispute about morality shows that they're comparing morality, which means that they both believe in an objective morality because they're comparing to something. And so I think, so that as an idea makes sense. But then he says that objective that they're comparing it to must be the real and true morality. And to me, like, if I just think physically, if I'm not talking about morality at all, like I have a ruler with inches, and then I have two other rulers, and I'm trying to check them against the first one to see which one is closer to the first one. That doesn't mean the first one is like real inches. It's only objective within that testing system.
Yes. Yeah, it's relative, or rather subjective.
Right. I'm creating like a vacuum of objectivity within a subjective context.
Right. Exactly.
And so I see no reason why two people, yes, I agree that two people arguing about morality, they're comparing it to something. A, they could each be comparing it to something different.
Right.
And B, that doesn't mean that what they're comparing it to is any more right than anything else.
Right. And yeah, because it's getting to the point that there's many there's like infinite degrees of freedom to morality.
Right.
But it's true that we have it seems like we have a binary axis. But this axis can be on a bunch of different angles. If that's how I'm thinking about it.
Sure.
I'm thinking of morality as a sphere, and the good versus bad is just a line that intersects that sphere. And you can have that line in any different orientations. And that's why, that's basically it. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Very geometric.
Very geometric.
Just call me.
Yeah, what I'm having
Marty
a hard time
Geo.
thinking is where I said, like, I think that there, at least with that sphere, many groups of people will have their lines be kind of like similarly oriented.
Yes.
Not totally the same, but similarly oriented.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, like, at least at this point, a lot of people think that stealing is wrong. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And because the thing is, most people who engage in stealing also have excuses as to why it makes sense for them to be engaging in stealing in this moment, which means that they also believe stealing is wrong. At least in the objective.
Yeah. No, and in that sense, I mean, this is where it's like you and I it sounds like we're almost agreeing with him then, because that seems to be what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I just don't agree with the objective morality point.
Well, but isn't that objective morality?
I guess I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing
that's
that
what he's saying is objective morality, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm I'm agreeing with half of what he's saying, and I'm disagree. I agree with his first basic premise, and I'm off by the second premise. And this is where it's like he's not going to argue me into Christianity because I'm already out.
I'll argue it into it.
Right. But this is like we talked about earlier. God has to be personal. I see like that. I'm sure you don't agree with that either. It's like this thing, but like for the Christian apologetics, that's hugely important because God becomes a man, and what is it that we are beholden to, but a person? Because people know what's right and wrong. It's all built into it. It has to be a person.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just whatever perspective you want to take. It either has to be a person or we all have to have a godlike thing within us, which is another thing he sort of mentioned.
This is the problem, I think, with most rationalistic arguments. Hoppe included, like the whole thing. And Nietzsche kind of talked about this. I don't think it was Schopenhauer. I think it was Nietzsche in The Antichrist, where he talks about the priests and like to be wary of people who are too like eloquently rationalistic, because they'll like spin a web of rationalism that is that, like, what does he say? He's like their like intellect or their reason will astound you and like turn you around, and it's all worthless.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where it's like, where you and I, it starts to feel like we're building ourselves into a sort of oblivion. You would agree with that?
Yes. I think we are, which is my problem. But like, C.S. Lewis to me is painting himself into a corner, and that's actually what I feel like a lot of these people are doing. Is they have this crazy premise, and then what that leads to is like something that doesn't make any sense anymore.
You know how I look at a lot of our generation?
How?
We look at the past, and I guess you could say we all with, I would say, postmodernist tendencies, and we see all of these people painting themselves into corners, and we're like, how do we not do that? And we end up doing it by not subscribing to anything. That's the only way that you can not paint yourself into a corner.
Right.
Which gets back to Reddit. I think that's another reason people don't say the things that they think, is because it's like then you have a tendency to paint yourself into a corner and be wrong. Because everybody, it seems like, will be wrong about something.
This is where I appreciate theology, and I know Nietzsche doesn't like this, but theology that's really self-consciously based on faith, because it's taking a different approach. Because to me, what C.S. Lewis is doing here is the most, it's like the destruction of religion. I think he's not seeing how much damage he is doing to religion by trying to create a rationalistic argument for it. Because the basis of what's powerful about religion, as opposed to postmodernism, is that it's based on faith. You can offload the fact that you can't be sure about anything. And like, what an easy, like, how good does that feel? That you don't have to not, like, it doesn't matter whether you're sure about anything. Stop worrying about that. Worry about the fact that you have faith that the universe will continue to be, and the meaning of your life is the meaning of your life, and you accept that. And that is, to me, the exact opposite of what C.S. Lewis is doing here. And I'm not even saying I have sympathy, like empathy for the guy who fought in the trenches in the First World War. It's another world. It's like he fought against all hell breaking loose, and then it breaks loose even more than last time. And it's like, I get it. And this is like, I get the pessimism, I get the sadness, I get the desire to retreat into rationality, because it feels sort of like safe and sterile. But to me, it's like, this is where faith is. That's the preaching here. It's the faith. We're going to win. It's not going to be like this forever.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's true. I mean, I like that. Maybe we should read Kierkegaard. It was making me think about, I mean, I think that's what his point is in Fear and Trembling.
Actually, in the foreword, whoever, I don't remember who wrote the foreword, I can look it up, related this to Kierkegaard.
Oh, great, yeah. Yeah, because he has this whole thing about Abraham as this like ultimate, I mean, Abraham had this ultimate sort of thing of faith, right?
Yes,
he circumcised his son and was going to kill him.
He was going to kill him.
Yeah,
actually, this is a funny thing. This only hits now. Like, I don't know. I feel like I've been such an idiot for so long. It's insane. Yeah. Like, just doing this podcast over the last several months, every night I'm just like, what the fuck? So like, I read the Bible so many times. Like, I started reading the Bible when I was like 9. I was fascinated by it, and I just didn't understand it. It made no sense to me. And I'd read it again and again and again, and I keep starting. And it was this Abraham story that's this seminal thing. It's the starting point of everything. And what does Abraham do? Nothing. He just is down with God. But like, he didn't do anything. He didn't do what Jacob, he didn't start a nation. He didn't do what Moses did. He didn't get the people. He didn't do anything. He was just faithful. And God loved him for that. And to me, like, that only hits now as to why that's an important starting point. And that's a radical starting, like, that's the kernel. The kernel is not the rational. The kernel isn't even the epic journey and all the great deeds. The kernel is faith. That's where it starts.
Yes, and from this perspective, I see why you feel like Christianity is actually not leaning into consciousness, or I suppose true Christianity.
Right. Mere Christianity.
Yeah, but mere Christianity. But I would say that what you just described is more of what religion's central purpose is for, versus what religions become when it gets manipulated sort of by people, conscious people, right?
Right. I mean, I get the opiate of the masses thing. That it kind of falls in line with what I'm talking about. In a pejorative way, but whatever.
Right, and it's more of getting to the fact that it's Christianity is teaching you, because you're having a population lean into consciousness so much in so many ways. Right. You have to tell them how to also lean away, and leaning away is faith, I think. Right. That's what I look at. Leaning away is faith, and not thinking about why am I doing this? Because the thinking and reflecting is that you're triggering consciousness, right? Right. But just reflexive faith of just like, it's fine. It's instinct.
I was looking for it and I lost it, but there's a Nietzsche quote about consciousness like that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember which text it's from. I heard it in the Daryl Cooper podcast about Nietzsche, and he quoted it, and I was like, I need to find it, and I haven't been able to find it yet. But it's Nietzsche talking about consciousness and how it is like crucial for people to have a medium amount of consciousness.
Yeah, and
we need enough consciousness to be able to take on our lives and make our lives better and make ourselves better. But too much consciousness and we'll go mad and kill ourselves.
Yes, and I completely agree with that. And I think that's what Aristotle sort of knew too when he wrote his Nicomachean Ethics, or however you pronounce it. Nico.
Nico. Yeah. So my other big problem was when he was giving examples of selfishness being bad, because he was talking about how materialists will argue, sort of similar to what you were saying about how people will do things that serve them. Because this is a belief that I have, and this is where I agree with like the Austrians and stuff, that there really is no such thing as altruism, and that people don't really do things that aren't beneficial to them in some way. But beneficial to them is a complicated idea. And this is what C.S. Lewis does, is he sort of glosses over it way too much. Because beneficial to you can mean a lot of things. Like going on a diet can be beneficial to you, like in months, and it's going to really suck right now. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to fight desire, which is a very difficult thing to do. Or doing something, helping your parents move when you don't want to. And you say, how is that beneficial to you at all? Well, it's beneficial to you to maintain a good relationship with your family. And it can go out there. And, it's beneficial to you to have a community, with your neighbors and stuff like that. And like my wife, when we move somewhere, she always bakes cookies or bread and brings it to the neighbors to begin to have a community, because it's, in a way, like the way we live in modern cities is really unsafe and very strange. Where like something could happen to you, nobody would have any idea. And also you can't call on anybody for help. Like there was a night where like a year ago or so, I ended up with getting a crazy fever of like 105.6. I was like delirious. I
still wanted a podcast, by the way. No.
Yeah, I was like way out of it. Like,
why can't you podcast?
Apparently,
tonight?
I had whole conversations that I don't remember. So. Anyway, but my wife was able to call our upstairs neighbors to come and watch our daughter so that she could take me into the hospital. So, like, something like that is huge. And that's hugely important for us. That's beneficial for us and for them. And that's part of what a society is. And this is like my whole like anarcho community cooperation, I think, is hugely important. And so he talks about how the materialist has no argument, because there's no reason for them to benefit society, and they have no argument for it. And I say there is a material and there is a selfish, quote, non-altruistic reason to do things that benefit your community and your society writ large and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, yes, exactly. I agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, silly.
No,
C.S.
and you're right. It is. We do live in a. I mean, like, yeah, I don't know any of my neighbors.
Right.
You know.
I mean, it's common. Yeah.
Part of that is it's just also people move so much more. We all live in apartments now. You know. But yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are my big thoughts on it. Those are my big bones to pick and all that.
I think that's good. Yeah, I mean, overall, I thought it was. I liked it. Actually, I did enjoy it. It was a nice, easy read. Very British.
Yes. His thing about gentlemen in the preface was cool too. We didn't talk about that.
What was that?
So he's talking about the meanings of words. Actually, this kind of relates to the Reddit stuff we were talking about. But he talks about how gentleman, as a term, originally meant landowning person or man. And then over time, it became sort of a congratulatory term, like essentially just meaning a good person, a good guy. And he said the problem with that is that completely strips it of any meaning and any value because there's already a term, a good guy. There's no reason to change a word that has a specific meaning into something else that there's already a meaning for. And he was saying that it's a problem that happens over time with language, and it happens with tons of different words. And then he's got a bit about the term Christian. I can actually read it. It's kind of interesting. He said, now, if once we allow people to start spiritualizing and refining, or as they might say, quote, deepening the sense of the word Christian, it too will speedily become a useless word. In the first place, Christians themselves will never be able to apply it to anyone. It is not for us to say who is, in the deepest sense, or is not close to the Spirit of Christ. We do not see into men's hearts, we cannot judge, and we are indeed forbidden to judge. It would be wicked arrogance for us to say that any man is or is not a Christian in this refined sense. And obviously, a word which we can never apply is going to be, or obviously a word which we can never apply is not going to be a very useful word. As for unbelievers, they will no doubt cheerfully use the word in the refined sense. It will become, in their mouths, simply a term of praise. In calling anyone a Christian, they will mean they think him to be a good man. But this way of using the word will be in no enrichment of the language, for we already have a word for good. Meanwhile, the word Christian will have been spoiled for any really useful purpose that it might have served previously. So he's taking it on both sides. He's taking it on the Christians sort of quibbling about who really is and who really isn't a Christian, and how that's their arrogance reading into people's hearts, and then the kind of general parlance calling somebody a Christian, meaning that they're a good man. Both of these impulses are stripping the word of any utility.
Why did I eat chocolate? Sorry, I agree. But I stupidly had some chocolate while you were
But what I
reading
think
that.
it's addressing, because there is a problem, and I run into this on Reddit, there's a problem with people say that's not what the word means. And so getting into too pedantic an argument about what a word means is useless. However, taking a word and stripping it of any meaning is also useless.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I quibble a little bit with this idea that it devalues it. I mean, I get it, the idea that now you have two words for one meaning, right? But I don't know if gentleman is the same as good man. I never really thought of it like that. I guess I can see that, but it's a little bit, it's not exactly good man. Like, you know what I mean? And that's the point, is it's not exactly on the same. And so,
Right.
and this is where it's like, the great thing about language is that we have all of these different words that have slightly different overlap, but they're not exactly the same. And so that's why we're able to sort of describe such nuanced things. So, you know, it is intrinsically different because it's a different sound. So it's right there. It's always going to be different. And it's always going to be invoking a different neural network just by that point alone. So I disagree with that a little bit. Also, like, yeah, also what we call a good man probably evolved with gentlemen, you know?
Maybe. I mean, I think probably good is a word that had a different evolution than gentle, but
different. But the point is that it's like, for all we know, good, it's on a different track. So good could change. It might not stay the same as gentle, you know?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think, to me, it's the same thing as the moral issue, that being too relative is a way to get linguistically taken advantage of. And I see this a lot these days, where there are movements to shift the meanings of words that bake in a win to an argument.
Sure.
Like one that is a little bit older, like this happened a lot in like 2015, was a shift of the word racist to not being related to race, but being related to power and prejudice. And that shift, so like you could argue, yes, language evolves, the word doesn't mean what it used to mean, but the problem is that what happens is it ends up meaning certain things that make it so that one side will just always win an argument because they own all the definitions of the words, and so you have nowhere to move if you're talking to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that point is taken. I think that's true, but I think that's also, it's difficult to say, like, I also find it hard to defend the case that language should be stagnant.
Yeah, I don't think there is a case that language should be stagnant. Well, I don't know that there is a case. I agree that language, it's an absurdity to think you could make language stagnant.
Right, exactly. It's always changing. And, you know, for all I know, that's the main way it does change, is you have just a group of people that's like, no, this should mean this. And then if they make a good enough case,
right,
eventually over years and centuries, essentially.
Right. But the first half of his point about the sort of quibbling about who is and isn't a Christian, like my wife talks about it a lot, growing up in a specific denomination that was like pretty small. We're talking a few thousand people. Mm-hmm. They had a doctrine that anybody who wasn't of that group wasn't a Christian.
Right. And
that's the exact kind of language shift I'm talking. It's similar to the racist thing. What it does is they silo themselves in, so they're putting up a wall, so they feel like they've won every argument.
Right.
Because they're defining. Yes. So you could argue with them about what's Christian, and they go, obviously that's not Christian because we don't do that. Because it's like defined internally to themselves.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, the point is taken. I mean, I think this just goes to show again how it's like, it's difficult to say there's any universal when we're dealing with language.
Which is why what I'm asking is, what do you mean by it? And does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's the only way. That's the only way forward.
Right. Or let's agree, at least for now, that this is what we mean by it. And then we could just use it to mean that for this conversation. Mm-hmm. That annoying construction that you do in college papers. For the purposes of this paper, I mean this by this. Mm-hmm. It's a cliche, but it's useful.
No, I agree though. Being clear, but that's kind of why I was bringing up the Arch Linux stuff at the beginning, because it's to say that there are groups of people who feel like, who just have a different philosophy than you and don't feel like you should explain everything to everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is exclusion. I mean, we talked about this a little bit with Ted Brown, right? The right to exclusion. That was much more of the, quote, norm, I would say, in the past than it is now. This egalitarian style of universality and like letting everybody in to everything is not the norm. I mean, that's in some ways it's almost an Anglican thing. I mean, I think that's where because it's like, it seems to be the West and the sort of Anglosphere that is the one pushing the egalitarian narrative the most, right?
Right.
I mean,
maybe, yeah.
Well, the British always like to remind everybody that they were the ones that ended slavery, right? So I don't know.
Not everyone loves that narrative,
that argument,
but yeah.
Yeah, no, I've heard so many English people say it though. It's funny.
They like it.
Yeah.
They're into it. Yeah.
So, yeah. What are we talking about?
Language. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
winded
down. But
Well, in the Arch Linux point is that this idea, like, I just think that understanding that a lot of people, I think, without saying it, actually carry that philosophy of like, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm thinking because then you'd know exactly what I'm thinking, and then you'd be able to potentially, it's actually very. It makes sense from a survival standpoint too.
Right.
It's like you don't want necessarily everybody to know exactly what you're thinking,
right.
Because then you can get taken advantage of. So,
but that's not yes, and this is like my ethic of the world that I'm trying to promote. I'm trying to do my best to be not hypocritical, and I'm hypocritical all the time, especially on our last podcast. But
I was wondering if we were going to talk about that, or if you want to. I mean, it's already kind of late.
Yeah, let's not.
Yeah. I don't think I'm gonna. I may or may not get this edited tonight.
That's fine. Anyway, we'll talk more about this stuff next time. That's fine.
Okay.
I think we did it for tonight.
Yeah, I think so too. Should I put that? I guess should I leave it as is, or should I put that Reddit stuff at the end?
I think it's fine.
It was about 20 minutes.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's probably fine.
I mean, maybe there's like some rabid C.S. Lewis fans that are like just itching to get to the content.
Get to the point. I'm just imagining that Monty Python.
Sure, that was fair.
They cut to the lone night.
You could put a little like timestamp in the YouTube.
Yeah, I could do that. That's true.
When we get into the C.S. Lewis.
That's true. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
because it's also like we used to meander and talk about other stuff a lot more in the early episodes, and then
we laser focus.
Well, part of it was feedback from, I would say, my Mark and stuff.